If you've been following me for a while, then you know that I love colored pencils, I love watercolors, and I love watercolor pencils. Let's use them all together today. Hi, Shanna Rowe Jackson here, also known as Caution Artist at Play, because I love to play with all different kinds of art supplies, and that's what we're doing today. We are combining 3 of my favorite supplies by Holbein. We're going to be using their brand new watercolor pencils with their regular colored pencils and their regular watercolors. And this came about because I recently reviewed their watercolor pencils, and one of the main features of this pencil is the fact that they have the same color names and pigments as their watercolors. They're made to match their watercolors. So I thought to myself, how can I mix the 2 of them together? And then I'm like, you know what? I'm a colored pencil girly. I can't leave out my old pal colored pencil. So I'm going to use colored pencils as well. And I'm just going to be working on a fall piece. Now, this is not a step-by-step tutorial, but I will be talking about some of my favorite tips and tricks and techniques that I use with each of these products and how I decided to combine them with each other. And I also should mention this video is not sponsored by Holbein. I am a brand ambassador for Holbein Legion and General Pencil Co. However, they did not ask me to do this video. I had these lovely products on hand and I wanted to see how I can combine them so that I had a better idea of how to present them in future workshops. So I'm going to draw some apples and we are going to have a fun time. Let's just get to it. For this project, I am working on one of the Stonehenge Aqua Cold Pressed Artist aluminum panels. Basically, it is Stonehenge Aqua Cold Press, which is mounted to an aluminum panel, making it a really strong structure. I have a video on these if you are interested in learning more about those. And then I have the brand new Holbein watercolor pencils. These have a beautiful cedar wood casing with a little paintbrush to differentiate them from their regular colored pencils. And then the classic Holbein Artist watercolors, which I have in my own custom palette. It's messy. She's messy, but she's well loved. And then also bringing in their classic Holbein Artist colored pencils. Those are their non-water soluble colored pencils. The full barrel of these is colored, so you can tell the difference between those and the watercolor pencils when I am working. So anytime you see the cedar wood, I am working with the watercolor pencils. Anytime you see the barrel that is fully colored, I am working with their regular colored pencils. Now I'm starting off with some of those watercolor pencils in the background, and I'm using these mainly as a little bit of a roadmap. I have some areas in the background that are more of a bokeh background that I didn't have completely drawn out, and there is a lot going on in this piece, a lot of different detail that can be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm breaking it down piece by piece. In the areas that I didn't have drawn in my preliminary sketch, I am coming in with my watercolor pencils first and just mapping them out. Now, the good thing about these pencils is that they have the same pigments in them and the same colors as their regular watercolors. So I am going to use these kind of as a baseline for certain areas, and then you'll see me come in with my regular watercolors and mix them right together, and it works great for this background. And it also just helps me kind of get an eye on what I'm working on and break it down a little bit so it's not quite so overwhelming. So that's where you're going to see me do in a lot of the background areas. You're going to see me come in with this base, and in some areas I just sketch something out, and others I might actually shade it in a little with my pencils and then come on top and wash it out. Now I have switched to my regular colored pencils to do some masking in some areas that I don't want to have move. Now, because colored pencils are oil and wax-based, they repel water. Typically speaking, you don't want to put watercolor over an area of colored pencil to try and cover the colored pencil. However, you can use that to your advantage. Because oil and wax repel water, you can use them as a resist for your watercolors. And so that's what I did there for the veining on the leaves. You're going to see me use this quite a bit on all the veins in the leaves. In some areas that I want to keep highlighted, I'm coming in with my regular wax/oil-based colored pencils, laying them down with the knowledge that they are going to repel the watercolor that goes on top, which means the lines that I put there are going to stay put. So for those areas, I always use my regular colored pencil. Now again, you don't typically want to lay down a huge area of colored pencil and then try to cover it with watercolor with the expectation that the watercolor is going to keep it covered. because that's not necessarily an archival way to do things. But when you plan it out ahead of time, you can put your watercolors over your colored pencils in a way that brings the special effects that you are looking for. So now you're going to see me go back and forth. I'm going to skip around a lot on this piece because there's going to be areas of the watercolor pencils and the regular watercolors that I need to dry before I can move on. So you'll see me skip around quite a bit. And then later on, I am going to come in with the colored pencils on top to create more detail once I have my watercolor layers down. The main base of this is going to be the watercolors. I am coming in smaller areas, as I said, to try and map things out a little bit with my watercolor pencils, and I may lay some pigment down with them, like in this area here, and then just mix them directly with my watercolors. But for the most part, it's going to be a base of watercolors. Now, it is not new. It's not a new technique. Like, I am not breaking the mold here by putting colored pencils over watercolors. But I got really curious, especially with these new watercolor pencils, to see how the three of them all work together. Because the watercolor pencils and the watercolors have the same pigments and have the same pigment names, I wanted to see how well those work together. But you know, I'm like, why not just bring in my colored pencils and put some detail as well? And I have to say, the colored pencils go over these watercolors and the watercolor pencils really, really well. Now, as far as the surface goes, I love working on this aluminum panel. It is such a strong surface, and it really gives an extra finished feeling to the artwork that I do on it. But I have to mention, typically speaking, I don't usually use my Stonehenge Aqua for colored pencils. It is a really nice, strong surface for watercolors. However, there are times when it can be a little bit delicate under a sharp point of a pencil. So I'm keeping that in mind when I bring my pencils in so that I don't dig into the paper too harshly. Or if I'm layering too much with my colored pencil, sometimes it might dig into the paper a little bit. So I'm really trying to lay down quite a bit of my watercolor first before I bring the details on top of my colored pencil, and I am going to be pretty gentle with my pencils. That being said, it is a pretty strong surface all the way around, so even if you dig into the paper a little bit, it's got a nice thick paper on there. I think they use their 300-pound paper when they mount it, so there's a lot of wiggle room there, but it's just something to keep in mind when you are using your pencils on this surface. It is better to go with a gentle hand. If you're somebody who has a strong hand, just keep that in mind. As you can tell, I'm just going through and working on the branches now. I like to go in, lay my underlayers of watercolor, let it dry completely. That's the other tip. Whenever you're working with colored pencil over watercolor, no matter what paper you're working on, you're going to want that surface to dry completely. And I think that's another reason why this surface can be a little bit delicate when it comes to pencils, is because it absorbs the water really, really well. It's a great watercolor paper. So it might take a little bit of time to dry. And so you want to give it that time to dry before you come over it with your pencils. And there you're going to see, I have a couple areas where I get a couple hot spots because I thought the paper was drier than it was. And my pencils kind of dug in a little bit. And you'll see on this apple in particular, later on, I'll show you how I fix an area where I got a little bit of a hot spot. I ended up bringing in another product for that, and we'll talk about that in a little while. I do want to apologize. You may hear some dripping in the background. It's a rainy fall day here in Maine, and we still have our air conditioner in, and you can really hear the drips. It's driving me a little bit crazy here, so I apologize if you can hear that in the background. So this is a huge layering process. Because watercolors and watercolor pencils tend to dry just slightly lighter, I have to layer quite a bit and then use my pencils on top to really bring that saturation, which is not unusual for a piece like this, and it's quite enjoyable actually. Now I am going to be bringing in my Meltz, which is a colored pencil solution used to kind of break down the colored pencil and mix it together. It is an aqueous solution, also by Holbein. I swear this stuff is magic. And you're going to see me use this quite a bit to blend out my colored pencil layers. Now, because this is aqueous, it can mix a little bit below with the watercolors and the watercolor pencils, but that was not too much of an issue. In fact, I found that to be quite an advantage when I wanted to blend out certain areas, especially in the darker areas of this piece. So you're going to see me come in a little bit with that. And later on, when I'm really working heavily with a colored pencil, you're actually going to see me use the palette method. You have seen me use this method quite a bit with my Inktense and watercolor pencils, where I scribble my pencil on a palette and then I lift it with a wet brush. I actually use that method quite a bit with my regular colored pencils and the Holbein Meltz. I take my regular colored pencils, scribble it on the palette, add my Meltz to it, and I wash it on like a watercolor. You've seen me do a video about this before. I will link that in the description below. And you're going to see me do that later on when I need glazes in areas that I've already used my colored pencil and I cannot bring my watercolors back into because the colored pencil would resist it too much. And so in areas later on, after I've put some detail down with colored pencil, if you see me come in with a brush, that's likely what I'm doing. And I'll point that out to you when we get there. Then again, I'm coming back into another background area with my watercolor pencils. Something that I found really cool about doing it this way, especially in the bokeh areas, is that if I'm gentle enough with my water and when I'm mixing my watercolors in with my watercolor pencils, if I don't wash it out so completely, so just a little bit of that pencil texture still shows through, it actually adds to that nice blurry bokeh look that I'm going for. So the watercolor pencils were fantastic for that. I really, really enjoyed using them for underlayers especially. Now, they don't just have to be used for underlayers. I have a video about the new Holbein watercolor pencils, and I will link that in the description below as well. Those are not available in the US just yet, but they're coming up towards the end of the year. Hopefully we'll have them around Christmas time. We'll see. It might be a nice Christmas wish list product for you, but you can layer enough that you'll get all the vibrancy that you need, just like with any other watercolor pencil. And I will link that in the description below so that you can see how those work just on their own. But today I wanted to mix them with my other products. Now, their regular colored pencils have different names. I'm sure that they use some of the same pigments, but they just have different color names. However, it's no trouble finding matching colors or colors that mix well with the watercolor pencils and the regular watercolors, as you can see here. I'm just adding a little bit more detail to my leaf there. You'll see I'll put some layers of watercolor down and then I'll come back on top and add a few more veins in another green color. And then I might add more watercolor on top. And now I'm at the point where I am coming in with just my full-on colored pencil detail. And if you see a brush on that particular leaf at this point, it's because I'm coming in with the Meltz to blend out my colored pencil layers that are on top. And it worked great. All of this stuff worked great together. The Meltz, the colored pencils, the watercolors, the watercolor pencils, all these things work fantastic with each other. I just had to be a little bit mindful of how I was layering because I wanted things to still be archival. So the most heavy parts of regular colored pencil were going to be on top as my final layers and finished details. Unless, like I said, it was for veins that I wanted to have resist the water with the watercolor. So it's really all about intention. You can mix your media. It's just a matter of planning out how you want to layer them so you can get A, the maximum effect, and B, still have an archival product when you're done. And it was wonderful. I had a fantastic time. Look at how that blends out. Now that is the Meltz. That was the Meltz blending out colored pencil on top of that darker leaf there. And then after that dried, I could come back in with my pencils and add even more details. So the paper took a really good amount of layers and all these products layered on top of one another really well. I can't believe how silky these colored pencils layer on top of their watercolors. It's fantastic. Again, this isn't new. Many people use their colored pencils on top of their watercolors. I've done it on the channel before, but I just love how well the Holbein products work together. Now we're getting into an area here. You can see that dark spot on that apple. That's where a little bit of the paper kind of got a little bit roughed up. And I will show you how I fixed that in just a little bit. But that was my own fault. I think I had put some Meltz down and my pencil kind of dug into the paper a little bit. Not enough for me to damage out this whole piece, And, you know, mistakes happen sometimes and you just keep rolling with it and then you figure out creative ways to fix it. And I'll show you that in a little while. But you're going to see me go back and forth on things while I'm waiting for other areas to dry, while I'm waiting for the apple to dry. I came back in to do some detail on this really dark leaf that's in shadow. Again, I'm coming in with my Meltz at that point and washing out that colored pencil. Look how well that blends out even on top of all the other layers. Coming in with my darker colored pencils now to do the darkest shadow areas. There's going to be some dark shadows here. I got to tell you a little bit, once I got onto that main apple and I had to put the darks in, whew, that was scary. But it was definitely a trust the process situation. I think a lot of art is, right? Most art is, even if you're working with a medium that you are super used to. I have not worked with all three of these together yet. So it did present a unique challenge for me, but I am pretty prolific in colored pencil and watercolor pencils, and I've been really into watercolors lately. So I do have a knowledge base to rely on so that I could try and bring out the unique qualities of each of these mediums, but also find a good way to use them together in a way that will complement each other and will enhance each of the mediums that I'm using. Now I'm coming in and I am using a regular colored pencil to kind of put that little star there at the end of the apple. I'm bringing in some dots and highlights. Now this is where I'm going to fix that spot. I have brought in a product by Brush and Pencil. This is their touch-up texture medium. Now this is made for colored pencil, so at this point I'm really only using colored pencil on top of it. I came in, added that touch-up texture, let it dry, let it kind of stick to the paper, and then I can come in a little bit later with layers of pencil on top. But I still don't want to mess with that part too much with a pointy pencil, so you're actually going to see me glaze my colored pencil solution over it. Again, that's a mixture of regular colored pencil with the Holbein Meltz, and I'll glaze over it a little bit later to smooth things out with the Meltz. Bringing in a little bit more detail in that light leaf. That leaf was flipped, so I don't want it to get too dark, but I wanted it to have enough contrast that you could see the detail within the veins, and so that it wasn't so stark against all the darkness around it. And I'm leaving a lot of my pencil texture there because it adds to the texture of the leaf. You don't have to smooth out everything, especially in nature. Some places you want to use the texture of the paper and the texture of your pencils to your advantage to create natural textures. Like in the bark, in some of these leaves, you're going to see that a lot here. Now I'm coming in with my layers of watercolor for this main apple. Because I created that little star with, I don't remember the actual name of that part of the apple. I like to call it a star instead of the butt. Neither of those are the scientific name, but I think you know what I'm getting at. I put that in with my regular colored pencils so that if I get a little bit of watercolor over it, I know that those are going to stay put. And again, this is a layering process. I am slowly darkening it. I'm letting things dry in between. I'm letting the colors really blend together at this point and get that nice painterly look. And then I'm going to tighten things up with my colored pencils later on. And I'm going in the direction to show the shape of the apple. Apples tend to have some streaks, especially whatever breed of apple this is. They tend to have these nice little streaks in them, and I'm curving them over the curve of the apple with my brush, and I'll be doing the same thing with my colored pencils when I come in with the other details. And I'm using some surprising colors here. I'm actually using a little bit of magenta, I'm using some orange, and a little bit of yellow in certain spots as well. And some greens. I'll be using some greens in some shadow areas because there's going to be greens reflecting on it, but also it'll help dull the red down a little bit because green and red are opposite each other on the color wheel. And when you mix them together, it makes some nice browns. And in the shadow area of that apple, there's actually a lot of brown. Like if I were to do a color pick, it's a lot of brown because you're going to have that dark leaf reflecting on it. You're going to have the darkness and the brown of the branch reflecting on it. Anything you paint is going to be affected by the colors around it. And I'm about to get really, really dark with this soon. And it nerves me up a little bit. Even watching it back, oh man, this part was a little bit hairy, but you have to get the contrast. You have to get the contrast. And so I'm going in with light layers at first, but once I start bringing in those colored pencils, ooh, baby. It's going to get dark, but it all comes together in the end. This apple is going to go through multiple ugly stages. So just bear with me, folks. I swear it comes together in the end. But I really thoroughly enjoyed this piece. I actually was going through some health issues during this time, and this was a really, really good distraction for me. And it's perfect for this time of year. I like to do apples. I like to do a lot of fall artwork, and so you're going to see a lot of that from me this year. But apples, pumpkins, corn, these are themes that repeat every year for me, or almost every year for me. Now I'm coming in with some of those dark pencils. I'm using some browns. I'm using my favorite color. One of my favorite colors by Holbein is raisin. I don't like eating raisins necessarily. I mean, I will if I have to, if they're in a cookie. But like the raisin color, I don't know why. I love that color. It's like a deep reddish purple-y, almost, I don't know. It has a little bit of a hint of brown to it. It looks hideous right now. That shadow looks hideous, but I swear it comes together. And some of the things that I want to make sure that I am including is I want to have some reflected light. That's going to help show the roundness of the apple, and it's going to show reflections from other things around it. In certain areas, I'm just using white for that because that's where the sky's reflecting, and white tends to blue things out a little bit. But in other areas near the leaves, I'm actually going to be using more of a like warmer kind of peachy color. It doesn't necessarily show that much, and maybe a little bit of yellow in those reflected light areas. But that's just to kind of show that the green is reflecting a little. I didn't want to go straight for the lime green, although I do use a little bit of that as well, just not, not too heavy-handed. And now I'm really just cleaning things up. I'm blending out my edges. There's a lot of harsh shadow edges there, but I do end up blending those out with my pencils. At this point, you're going to see me using a lot of the burnishing. But in that main shadow area, I did blend out a lot of stuff with my Meltz. And it worked just fine on top of the watercolors. I feel like I've repeated that a lot, but I was ecstatic to see how well my Meltz worked with these products as well. I knew the colored pencils were going to work beautifully on top of the watercolor. I didn't know how well the colored pencil blender would do because it is aqueous. I didn't want it to lift too much of the watercolor below. It did just what I needed it to do. So if you have a bunch of your Holbein items that you haven't played with together, try it out. Because these are all very similar. Like, it's not like we're getting too crazy here, right? Watercolor pencils are a mix of watercolor and colored pencil, right? So using the three of them together isn't too crazy. But some of us may not think to do that. And I have to say, the main benefit to me mixing my media here is the fact that it sped things up significantly. If I were to only do this with my colored pencils, it would have probably taken twice as long. Even if I had just done it with my watercolors, the layering that I would need to do and the amount of work I would need to do to tighten things up to the point where they are here using the colored pencils, that would have taken some time as well. This is about 7 hours worth of footage, maybe an hour or so of some touch-ups off screen. And this would have been so much longer had I just done it with one medium, just because the amount of detail in this piece. What do you think? I love how this came out. I love how well all three of these work together. I'm definitely going to do more projects like this in the future. What is your favorite way to do mixed media? I know this wasn't too adventurous, but I had a lot of fun with it. Let me know, and would you be interested in trying this kind of mixed media if you haven't already? Thank you so much for watching, friends. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I love how this painting came out. I love how the products work together, and I can't wait to do more like it in the future. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you really like it, please hit that hype button because that really helps us creators out. I will see you next time. You have a fantastic day. Bye.